Oh shit. I always forget it does that. All right. Let me go to YouTube really quick, make sure it's doing its thing. Bam. We're live.
Oh, sure.
Easy peasy. Alrighty. Well, we're back. Joe, we very quickly realized that we had more to say about Cyberpunk since we've been since we last discussed. I think it was like 3 weeks ago now for the Edgerunners, but we really didn't even. We kind of stayed away from just the show itself. But since then, Jordan, you've watched Cyberpunk, Edgerunners, and also played the games. So we kind of just wanted to hop back on here, and I think the best place to start is what were your thoughts on the anime?
The anime was great. Um, I don't know. I was kind of blown away when I first saw the trailer, and I was like, "Interesting. That might be corny." It was like, "I'm not gonna watch it." And then you hopped on and said, "Yo, the Cyberpunk anime is dope." And I think you said, "Wait till episode 6." I think you said it then.
Yeah.
Then later on, I started watching. I'm like, "Oh, I'm a few episodes in. It's good." And then Joe, you said, "Did you get to episode 6?" And I was like, "All right, something must happen in this episode." And when you get to that episode, I don't know, are we doing spoilers? No
Yeah,
spoilers?
we can do
Yeah,
spoilers. The show's
spoilers.
been out for a couple months.
Okay. Okay. Holy fuck.
Right.
Let's walk me through like so. What were your like initial impressions like getting up to episode 6?
So initial impressions, it was pretty much like kind of like a standard anime. You know what I mean? Like they set things up, you get the exposition, you get this guy who's the protagonist, and it's been a couple weeks since I watched, so I might be forgetting names and stuff. But David, I
That's
think his
fine.
name was.
Yeah, David's
Um,
the main character.
the protagonist. He has his like kind of special. He's different than the rest in the status quo, and that's kind of standard in anime. You have the protagonist who's doing something exceptional, right? And so they're establishing that, and that this guy is kind of like a, uh, like oh my god, this dude's like kind of the shit almost, but like still kind of learning and like a rookie.
Yeah.
He has like goofball tendencies, just a standard anime. Like you see that in any kind
Yeah,
of
Yeah.
show.
he it's almost like he's like a Naruto-esque figure
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
it's like that run in the mill. You get what you're watching pretty early on, right?
Yeah.
Um, and with that being said, it's not a bad thing. It was good, and it was entertaining and engaging, and especially if you've kind of come from the video game, I feel like they did a good job of capturing what it felt like in the game in the anime, at least
Oh
to
yeah,
me.
I think so.
Um, and so I was just like, okay, I'm in. This is cool, right? But not like necessarily exceptional, but it's good. And then you get to that sixth episode, and it kind of flips shit on its head when it's like, oh no, we're gonna really take you into the mind of this like this dark, almost grounded look at what cyber psychosis is. And I didn't really think of it that way while playing the game. And they talk about it, I was kind of just like, oh, okay, this is like a mission. Didn't really think much about it. But when they showed it like this, I'm like, holy fuck. That's intense.
Yeah. Cuz like in the game, to kind of just contrast this to the game, because you're a protagonist that's kind of special in a different way because you have a separate consciousness riding along. I'm going to try and stay away from spoiling the game, Joe, since you haven't
Yeah.
played it yet.
Spare me.
I don't really want to like give it away because it's kind of a important hook to the intro of how that gets all set up. You as a character in the game don't really experience cyber psychosis. I have a theory about that, and think after you play the game, Joe, we can rediscuss this. But yeah, the cyber psychosis thing was like you kind of you notice it early on in the game because the game has all these like basically wanted targets that are cyber psycho sightings or warnings. So there's people spread out all over the world in the game, and since you're like a bounty hunter, you're a cyberpunk, so i.e. bounty hunter, you can go to and find all these cyberpunks in the world, and you have an opportunity to either kill them or incapacitate them. And so you kind of know it, but you're not really like presented with like understanding it unless you incapacitate them. So it's like totally player choice, and you're kind of when you first play the game, you're just like, I'm gonna kill everything because everything is just going a million miles an hour at you. You don't really know what the fuck is going on. So you're just like, murder it, it's trying to kill me, I don't care. Flight or flight kicks in real quick.
But yeah, it's I don't know. They gave it like an emotional layer that I wasn't anticipating.
I wasn't expecting that either.
Yeah, that I feel like a lot of animes, the good ones do that, right? And like even Naruto can kind of hit that, but it's still expected. But this was like how you can see this guy clearly. I forget the name of the guy who went through it.
Is it Maine? Maine is the
Yeah.
one.
Main.
Yeah.
You can see him like almost struggling to not lose his mind, but also like he knew it was like he felt like he knew it was too late, didn't want to admit that it was too late, and then was trying to hold on to like any semblance of himself that there was. Like at the end when he looked at David,
Yeah.
I forgot the quote he said, but he said something to David.
Oh yeah, because David goes to him and tries to stop him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he tells him that it's the end of the road for him, but not for David, and that he should keep running.
That's it. And I was just like the emotional layer they put in that. I mean, that was definitely the climax or the best episode I would say of the anime, in my opinion. And almost in most animes I've ever seen, just because of how hard they hit the nail on the head with kind of what this experience that they keep hinting at and getting at, like, oh, if you keep adding all these things to you, you're gonna go crazy, you're gonna lose your mind. And I think the way they hit it was so emotional, but also like horrific. And it's like
it's like equal parts tug at the heartstrings and equal parts because it does a good job of like setting up the squad, like your team, and you kind of get a sense of who each of the people are.
Yeah, and it's I'm happy you say horrifying, because that's exactly how I felt about it. It was not a pleasant experience. It was like seeing a character that you like, and if you are putting yourself in his shoes and imagining what that would be like, to kind of suddenly be in and out of the moment. And he's like one moment he's talking to somebody, and the next moment he's seeing something else. It's like his whole connection to reality dubious. And like the moment that they show where he's walking on the road, like he's having that dream of running, and he himself all cyberpunked out is suddenly on that road again. And then somebody calls his name, he snaps to, and he's standing in front of a wall like he's a broken NPC in a video game who's just walking into this wall, not moving. And you see him like doing that, and you're like, oh man, he's losing it. And you can tell the whole time he's trying. It's like he's angry that this is happening to him. He's angry that he's like addicted in this way. He almost reminds me like a violent alcoholic. Like, I'm fucking fine. Like this whole attitude. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. And then the horror in his eyes when he goes full psychotic, and the moments where he flips back into reality again just to see the things that he's done. And it's no longer like this, I'm going to be just fine, where you're sort of denying the reality of the situation. Suddenly reality's become too real. It's become all too real, and there is no denying it anymore. There is no I'm better than this. There is no I can overcome this, I'm stronger, any of this. It's suddenly the abject horror of the whole situation is right in front of your face, and there's nothing you can say to deny this. And there he is in that moment, just going, did I do this? And like what? Like almost in disbelief as it's occurring. And then just I'm happy that this anime, it was interesting because I listened to certain reviews online that were just to gauge people's opinions. And some of them were kind of reveling in the over the top action, like the super violence of the whole thing. And as if it was kind of a fun, well, look how crazy that is. But that's not how that episode struck me. They definitely were hyper violent, but it never felt unrealistic in that moment or the world. And so the terrifying gore of the whole thing, and then again, to put yourself in his shoes, to witness you doing something like that, was jarring. The whole episode was jarring.
I also thought the juxtaposition too of like when he's like flashbacking where he's like on that road outside of Night City, you see Maine as like a skinny shit, and that's like, to me, I saw it as like, oh, this is what is going to happen to David. It was like this like foreboding or foreshadowing, because Maine had said something to David in like episode 3 maybe, when they're like sitting outside of their like little hideout area, talking about how he needs to get more chrome and like more implants to be able to protect people, or at least protect his crew, kind of thing. And I'm like, you know, because you don't know what like he's been through, other than that he is clearly experienced and stuff like that. So you don't even think that he would be like a normal sized person because of how confident he is, right? And you slowly see this facade change as he's like breaking down and almost like having quote unquote factory reset.
Yeah. To Joe's last point, when I watched this episode, I was like the whole time until it ended, and I was like, oh fuck. But yeah, and then Wenzel, to your point, I feel like they also like really quickly showed where his like addiction came from, or where it was rooted in. I feel like in those flashbacks, like you kind of see him as a regular dude, and it's like you can kind of tell like, oh, he didn't want to be that. I don't remember exactly what the scene was, because there was this other in what's the show, The Boys, has a similar thing with the guy who runs, I'm sorry, I don't remember names, but the dude who runs in The Boys, there's like a similar A-Train. There's like a similar either flashback or something where he was running and like struggling, and that's why he needed to do whatever he needed to do. And I'm maybe getting those confused, but I feel like when they were showing Maine running, wasn't he like struggling or something like that? Like it was like,
yeah, I think it was something like, because he was like, his body was physically weak, he turned to cyber implants to be able to account for those weaknesses to become strong. And it's like, once you hit a certain point, it's not the point to be strong anymore. It's because you just need more.
Yeah.
It's like because like go ahead, Joe.
It makes me think of what it would be like to imagine like to be a bodybuilder. Like you're trying to be the best. You're in this competition. You're lifting weights. You're busting your ass every day. And then someone like Arnold comes around and it just crushes you. And you're like, what the fuck is this? I've been trying so hard. I've been working so hard to do this. And someone comes out of nowhere and is just better. And then imagine dangling in front of that person steroids in that moment, right? Who doesn't take it? Who doesn't take the opportunity to improve themselves for an upgrade, right? And that this is part of the game that David and Maine were playing, is it's like, you're vulnerable, you're imperfect, there are other people out there who are just going to outperform you, and I can give you something. I can give you something.
Yeah. It's like they always tell them when it's too late. Like they've already gone down that path, and they're like, oh, by the way, you know, the cyberpsychosis thing, it's like it happens to everybody, and it depends on how far you want to go. Like ride that edge, you know, kind of pun intended with Edgerunners. But like you end up, and then the people around you that care about you end up saying like, well, maybe you should look into not doing, like, take away some of your upgrades, right? Like, can you imagine telling someone like losing an ability you've had for a couple years all of a sudden and saying, well, it's, if you want to stay alive, you're going to need to stop doing that. And it's like almost everybody is going to try and fight that for everything it's worth.
You can do it with artists too. It's like the number of artists who got into making art on, in some sense, false pretenses, meaning that they were dependent on alcohol in order to do their writing, and or that they were doing LSD to make better music, right? And you just keep playing that game, and then you give them a nice little hit of success. Ooh, it's working. Ooh, I'm getting a career. Isn't that interesting? And then suddenly you're writing, and then you have a little writer's block, and you're like, oh, well, I got to have a drink. I just need a drink, man. And then you play that out for 20 years, and then they're about to die from cirrhosis of the liver, and you tell that guy, you have to stop drinking or you will die, and see if he actually stops. Because his entire, everything he wanted, he built on a foundation of a very dangerous thing. And his career became predicated on that substance. And so the same thing, it's Maine created a career predicated on the powers that he'd been given, but now they're killing him, and you're asking him to take them down a notch, to let it go. Who lets it go?
I don't know who does. Like you have godlike abilities. Like you, say tomorrow you could 2x your lift on something, right? You could jump the height of a 2-story building, and they say that's killing you. Could you say no to that? Even if you say knock off 2 years on your life, I don't think most people would take that away.
And they just don't. And the thing is, it's so out there, you just deny it the whole time. No. Not
right,
me.
because everyone wants to be
me.
different, right? Like everyone wants to be the hero of the story that's different than everybody else. Like I can handle it. I can take it. I'm grandiose enough.
Yeah. That was a really cool theme of the show too. When it's like, well, when it's like your success or your ability becomes your identity, and then someone's like, oh, let's take that away, and it's like, well, who am I without this? I remember who I was, David, before the implant. He literally got his ass kicked, and then
that was one of the
He
funniest scenes ever, where that school bully kid is doing his like Rock Lee.
It was so over the top, just like goofy, but then kind of badass at the same time. It was like, really,
I was like, when I was first watching that, I was like, what the hell am I watching? I'm like, is this really going to be the rest of the show?
Right. But then the darker flip of that. So that's kind of like, how you can laugh it off, right? But then when his mom gets shot and he's helpless, it's like that's what he remembers without his implants. And so when you say, hey, David, just remove that stuff, he's like, nah, this is who I am, this is who I'm supposed to be. And then the cool theme that they have is like this idea of thinking you're exceptional, thinking you're different. And maybe David was at some point, but then believing, oh, since I'm a little bit different than everyone, I can handle whatever the name of that implant was he had. I can handle this, and everyone else would have lost their minds already. I'm different, I'm better, exceptional. But then they subvert that at the end.
He's like, I'm the special one, guys. Don't worry.
Yeah.
And I love it. I love that they pulled no punches throughout the whole thing. Like no one had plot armor, which was, I was like, oh, thank you. Stakes, it matters. Good. And it's like, it ends, and the only person in the show who doesn't, it's like David, like everyone else, is human, right? And the only person in the show who doesn't go crazy from all the implants is inhuman, right? Because Adam Smasher is a psychopath, and that's the idea. It's like, you're a human being. You have limitations. You're not going to be able to do this. And the kind of thing you would become is not human anymore. It's just all gone. It's just this nightmare.
Yeah.
The Adam Smasher theme is very much a Darth Vader. They're in the same universe.
Yeah, because he's basically sacrificed himself to become more machine than human,
right?
And he's just a weapon of the mega corporation.
Yeah, and you don't know Adam Smasher's backstory in the show. Maybe you do in the game. I don't know, but like,
not really.
I think we talked about this last time, but
a little bit.
But like, Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker, and he loses his mom, and then he loses the only other woman in his life, right? Or at least the threat of her dying is about to come, and so he becomes fixated on stopping death, right? Probably on his own, and the idea of death in and of itself. And I think Yoda at one point like warns him that worrying about death is a path to the dark side. And so he does what everybody does, is that when you fix it on death like that, then you try to manipulate it. It's like he's trying to become the thing that can manipulate death. And he makes this confusing error where the wielding of death is confused for its mastery. So that in killing everyone, he thinks himself more powerful than death itself. Look at me, I can do this at any moment that I want. Look how much control I have over life and death. Except he doesn't. It's an illusion. And in the path towards that, this impossible task, overcoming death, piece by piece, Anakin becomes less human. First an arm, and then another arm and a leg, and he gets lit on fire, and then he's a more machine than man, like they say in New Hope, right? It's like that's what that does to a person. That's what it's trying to tell you, is that if you aren't willing to accept the fact that you're vulnerable and that you and the people you love will die eventually, then you are on the path to inhumanity. Which is fucking cool.
Was that similar to Adam Smasher? Because that was one
It's also
thing
David's story is kind of like that too.
Yeah,
that is David's story. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they put Adam Smasher in there as a contrast for where, in some sense, David is heading. Like, because you don't know any of the backstory for Adam Smasher at all, so he could be very much like, it doesn't really matter, right? It's just that, do you want to be that? Is that where you want to go?
Right. I wish they pulled on that. That was the one thing. I was like, I wish there was a little more to that.
I know they could have easily added like 1 or 2 more episodes to kind of expand on the very ending a little bit more to like let it breathe. Because it feels like they just fast forward through like the last few episodes to kind of like get to the ending, which is fine because like it feels like they need it feels like it's being pulled to a climax.
Right. Right. So it's okay. Just if they introduced him a little earlier, even if they didn't want to add more, that might have been a personal thing, because if he was supposed to be more of just like almost like a force of nature more than like something you really had to understand. I can see that, and that makes sense. But my curiosity, I was just like, how did this dude seem like? He seems like he has his sanity.
Right. How does he not have cyberpsychosis? That's a good point. I didn't even like think about that.
Right.
I heard somebody online say that they thought that the reason that Adam Smasher doesn't have cyberpsychosis is because he was a psychotic from the outset.
No.
He wasn't trading anything out. Like there was no humanity to lose. He was just,
that makes sense, honestly. Yeah. So the other part of all this is I've gone down the rabbit hole on like where the cyberpunk genre started. I have there's a separate book about Cyberpunk 2077 called The World of Cyberpunk. That's kind of like I was telling you, Joe, before we started recording, but basically like a journalistic type. Like, how did the world become the world that you play in the game? Also, the world we see in the show. So you get a really deep sense of like how things progressed. Basically, it's like an alternate history of the world, where instead of in like the early 2000s, like year 2020, the world fucking collapses. The United States dissolves. There's now a thing called the New United States, but most of the states are free states. Night City is in Northern California, for those who didn't know. But Night City is basically just completely independent. Like nobody touches it. It just like Wild West basically as a hyper technology dystopia. But that aside, I was reading the book or starting to read the book Neuromancer, and I sent Joe you a part of this quote, but I feel like this quote encapsulates like the entire essence of the Edgerunner show. In like this is like what they were going for in creating it, and why I think the pacing feels like what it is. So, quote, Night City was like a deranged experiment in social Darwinism, designed by a bored researcher who kept one thumb permanently on the fast forward button. Stop hustling and you sink without a trace, but move a little too swiftly and you break the fragile surface tension of the black market. Either way, you are gone with nothing left but of you, but some vague memory in the mind of a fixture like Rats, who's a bartender in the story, though heart and lungs or kidneys might survive in the surface of some stranger with new yen for the clinic tanks. And it's funny because that's Night City is being said right there in this book. Neuromancer was first published in 1984.
When did the tabletop game this was based on? Let me see. Come out on table.
I want to say 90s sometime. But either way, I thought you guys would really appreciate that, because basically David breaks that surface tension by the end of the show, and that's why Atom Smasher has to come and get rid of him.
Yeah.
Yeah, it came out in 1988.
Okay, so only 4 years later.
So I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he was influenced by Neuromancer and then took the name Night City from the book.
But either way, I thought if this is, the crazy experiment of social Darwinism, where you just have to be hustling constantly. And if you don't hustle, you just disappear as a faceless nobody because someone made money off of you, and don't matter.
Wow. It's really I feel like there's so much to explore in that world. Obviously, we have the games. I would assume there's going to be another game.
Yeah, they announced it recently. CD Projekt Red.
Okay, I would be surprised if there wasn't. Even with all the bugs and stuff initially, I was like, it's fun. Even with that,
I mean, the world is too rich to there's too much to play with. Like, there's too many toys. You could go around and break things and tell interesting stories. I think.
Yeah.
Given the struggles that the game had, I mean, clearly, the game right now, it's going through a resurgence right now just because of how good the show is.
Right. I mean, in the show too, they're showing that there's so much more to tell, and it would be cool if they did kind of like an anthology type thing with this anime, where it's like each season is another character or something like in the world. Doesn't have to be connected at all. Maybe mentions here or there or something. But I'm just like, man, there's so much story to tell, and like so many themes to pull on, and like they can go any direction they want.
Yeah, they introduced so much. Like that episode, we haven't touched on this one yet, but this one fucked with me too, which was the episode. I don't remember if it must come after Maine is dead, with the guy who makes the experience chips or.
Oh, the brain dances.
Oh yeah.
Right, where one of them is the memory of a guy who went cyber psychotic going through the slaughter that he's in. And then
that might be episode 5, maybe.
Is
it either 5? It might be either. There might be the same episode. It might be 5 and 6 like combined, because David gets kidnapped by that guy, and he's like experimenting on him with that explicit BD.
I don't remember which came first. If that was 5, and then if that was episode 5, dude, they're setting you up so hard, because it's like, let me put you through that experience, right? And how horrible it is and how it's torturous to David. Like, it's literally a form of torture, which just that idea that you could implant someone with a feeling, like a whole experience of torture without actually hurting their body, right? It's like waterboarding, because they say it's not real torture because it doesn't cause any physical damage to the person, it just simulates drowning. It's like waterboarding, but turned up to 11. It's like the idea of that being a thing. The fact that somebody thought about doing that enough to put it into the show or into that universe means that people can generate that fantasy. And if you don't believe that when people have the power to make fantasies a reality, that they won't do that, then you have more faith in people than I do. So which suggests also that this is what's so freaky about this whole show to me, is that it's like, oh, we're heading in a direction where all of this technology will be possible. It will totally be possible. I don't see how we don't make this kind of shit.
Right. Because like the easiest, so this has been thought of so another book that came around at the same time was called Ready Player One, which is all about VR and AR haptic stuff. And in those books, they get into it where they have basically the ability to record experiences like kind of like a GoPro, but like you could basically record an experience of you witnessing some like top tier athlete doing something crazy, right? But you'd pay money as a service to be able to experience what other people do, right? Because not everyone's going to have the same skill set to be like a world champion surfer or snowboarder that, surfs a 50-foot wave and doesn't die. But really quickly, right? all of a sudden now, as soon as you open that cool doorway, there's a dark side of this that gets like, okay, now there's what happens when the crazy people get a hold of this and they record themselves doing something ridiculous. I don't even want to say it out loud because it's disgusting, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, and then you add the extra layer because there's a point where this like turns into, because if you're just recording video feed, that's fine, right? Like there's a certain layer of distance, but what happens when you have like devices that can record like neural input where like you can feel, like you can simulate the feeling of that person, like what that person was feeling, like the elevated heart rate within safe limits, or like the feeling of like if it's something's being done to you in that thing, you could have like a simulated feeling being presented to your brain or your however. I mean, I'm getting really into sci-fi territory, but I guess we're already there because we're talking cyberpunk anyways. But like this is where I go with all this stuff, and maybe because I'm more in tune with it because I do wear wearables so much that I just see this coming very, very soon. Like it's just a matter of time that we're going to start implanting devices that they're going to be passive at first, but eventually they're going to start influencing how we feel or how we operate.
I mean, it'll be a badass time in some senses. Like, some senses it could be badass, but I guess like with everything, there's always a downside. Or like
Always.
the other side of the coin is like, oh, why'd you guys have to make this suck? Why couldn't it just be like, why can't I just experience what it's like to be a professional surfer and like we leave it there, like
right. But there's always going to be a black market.
Yeah.
We can never leave anything alone, right? We always have to see like, well, what if we could go there?
Right. Which it would be interesting to see a positive version of that idea, because I feel like anytime something like that is teased, there's always like the super dark end of it, like Cyberpunk.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or The Matrix in a sense. Blade Runner, maybe not. No, kind
Blade
of.
Runner is still dystopian, but it's more like ecological dystopian.
Yeah. They're worried about there's no environment remaining.
But so is Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk has the Cyberpunk of 2077, it has ecological dystopianism, but it's more about like the social dynamics, like basically it's almost like a Wild West almost. It's weird because it's not like a growing city like you normally think of the Wild West, but it's a city that's got the power structure is the mega corporations, and they're kind of like the big bad, and then you have the gangs that are kind of doing what they can do, and then you have all the cyberpunks who are kind of like the freedom net. They're like almost like a Fallout-esque kind of group,
like cowboys or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like they're like free riders, I guess. If you think about, I don't know how to. I'm not sure if the word right comparison is off the top of my head. I'm kind of pulling this together as I'm just talking about it.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like a Han Solo type. I guess that's kind of like the best. They're smugglers almost, and they're just trying to make ends meet, but like not commit to any ideology or other. Like they don't want to be part of the megacorps, and they don't want to be part of a gang, and so they just kind of keep their own little niche protected as much as they can.
Right.
And then they usually flame out and die because that's just the state of the world.
Yeah. It's not maintainable.
Yeah.
It always seemed like, I don't know if you guys mentioned this in the last time. So if you have, I apologize. But it seems like at least with Cyberpunk, seems like a commentary on like capitalism. And like blowing it up so far. Which is interesting because it's like you can see how if it really gets out of control, you get these like, I don't know how many corporations there are, but I know the name of the first one's like Arasaka or something like that.
Yeah, there's at least two. Or there's Arasaka, which is the Japanese one, and then there's the other one that's more prominent in the games. It's called Militech.
That's the one. But yeah, like you have these like almost like these two companies that seem like they run everything, and then you go to Night City and you see how it's like when you get to the bottom of it, it's just like, muck, like all like forgotten. And it's just like, yeah, figure it out. We don't really give a fuck because we're rich and we're good. So
Yeah,
um,
it kind of reminds me of like if you were to tell a story in Star Wars on Coruscant, right? Because like Coruscant is a world, is an entire planet that has a city on every inch of the planet. But the cool thing about Coruscant is it's so old and so complicated that the rich people are on the outsides of the planet and high up, but all the people who are not rich and powerful live in the lower levels or the undercity as they call it. And in those stories, like there's a lot of other writings that Disney will never touch because it's too dark. But they talk about the seedy underbelly of all these things, which to me that feels like the kind of story you would see in that kind of world played out. Whereas like this is kind of a compressed version of that because you're talking about these two megacorps that basically the way it plays out is like the world, like globalization fails, all of the world's nations kind of collapse, and what's left are these megacorps who, or rather they don't become megacorps right away, but over time they do, but then they have a rivalry between Arasaka and Militech, and then they start hiring or developing technology like the cyberware to fight battles against each other because they're competing. And so you basically have government or company agents that are like super soldiers, and the people that get caught in the crossfire are the people that live in these free cities. And then by ramifications of that, you get black market stuff or contractors, which are called fixers in this world, who just kind of work as middlemen that play across both sides of the line. They're not really working on both sides, but they'll take contracts from both sides and, they make money and whatever.
You're right to point out the capitalism bit. That was, yeah. It's like when I saw it, I thought, oh, yeah, we're already halfway there. It's like half the different. It's if you just look at social media right now, what it's already doing is that social media is not, it doesn't sell anything to us. I mean, some kind of a bit of connection and a place to store your photos and all this. What is the real product of Instagram is your attention that it sells to advertisers. That's an advertising model. It's public. It needs to grow for the sake of the shareholders. And they're selling us to them. And it has to be an addictive thing because if what they're mining, if the natural resource that they're mining is our attention, then the way you do that efficiently is to addict you to the thing, to never let you look away, right? Now imagine if Apple started developing the new iArm 3, right? Where you can now replace not only your attention, not only can we take your attention from you, we can take your body parts and then we can get you in our ecosystem. And every 2 years, you better upgrade. Otherwise, you're falling behind. And now we can get a new way at your money, one piece by piece, until we've taken literally every bit of your existence for cash. And that's the end game where Cyberpunk takes it. And it's like, oh yeah, we'll just get you addicted to our products,
right,
as any iPhone user is, as any Starbucks devotee is, but this time we'll give you a new leg.
well, think about the early stages of this are, well, Meta is in the metaverse is trying to do this already. If you look at what the Oculus is trying to do, basically they're looking at all the apps that we use every day that are on screens like this, and they say, so how do we transition that to something where you put on an Oculus headset or equivalent and you just never take it off? You'd remove the friction as much as you possibly can so that everything you do is made by one company. And by the way, as many of those services require you to have a membership or some sort of membership that you're paying monthly. And so all of a sudden you enter into a world where instead of, having a free and open internet, now your livelihood is directly contained within that of a company's. And that's what the megacorps do in Cyberpunk. They literally turn you into like an indentured servant that you eat, breathe, and sleep the will of the company.
Oh my god, it's
Got real.
yeah, no, it's terrifying, and which is why I brought up that I'm like, it'd be cool to see the positive. If someone can possibly, which when you think about it and how we're talking about it, you can only really think of negative, right? It's like this is only, but
It
it's
is
like,
dystopian after all, right?
but it's like, what would it look like if that became positive, or how would that be possible? Maybe with this like super capitalism, these like one or two companies controlling everything. I don't think that's possible to be a good thing.
Right.
But in some other sense, it's like it would just be interesting to see like a day city instead of a night city. You know?
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. I mean, I think the way what you'd want to see is something where instead of having so much centralized like power, where it's just like they're just accumulating all of this, you'd see kind of like a groundswell of like multiple different ideas and open and honest, instead of having such like a dog eat dog world where everyone's trying to just claw and scrape for the scraps that the megacorps don't want. You'd want to have something around that isn't so, I mean, brutal, because I mean it's almost like, even though the society is hyper advanced, it's almost like humanity's in a constant fight or flight regardless of like the first two episodes of Edgerunners, I think, set up the stakes of the society for like the lowest common denominator, where his mother is trying to scrape and claw to get her son to go to a good school, which ironically is run by Arasaka. But like, then she's caught in the crossfire for gang violence, and then he can't even like see her because they don't have good enough insurance, right? Like, I think in that world you're seeing kind of like the capitalism taken too far, where all of a sudden, if you don't have the right trauma team insurance, you're treated just like a fucking piece of cattle or something, where you can't even see your own mother, even though she's terminal. And then you go to a vending machine and her ashes come out already pre-wrapped in a pill. And you're like, the fuck? Like, this is what we value human life, right? Like, so that's how I think we would need to brainstorm how would we want to see the opposite of that.
Yeah. I think it's hard right now. I mean, it's hard for a couple of reasons. One is people are just more sensitive to where things can go bad than where they can go well. So I think that part of the reason that we get dystopian stuff when thinking about the future is people are just looking for the pitfalls. They're going, where can this go off the fucking rails so we can dodge that shit? But that's not enough. And you know what I mean? You need to know not just where not to go, but also where to go. So you do need the positive end. But I think the other thing is, I was reading this book. We were actually going to talk about it before we started to talk about Cyberpunk so much. But Icarus Fallen. So it'll be a teaser for the next live stream. But it's Icarus Fallen. It's by Chantal Del Sol, who's a French philosopher who is writing about our current time. And she imagines us to be where Icarus would be had he survived the fall. So after striving for great heights and then watching it all come crashing down, you're sitting there in the embers wondering, what the fuck happened? Like, what do I do? Oh my God. That is how she imagines the Western world to be right now. And that part of the reason she imagines that is because over the course of the last 500 or so years, we watched our religious systems become more and more narrow and dangerous. And we've learned from history how they can become dogmatic and theocratic and then oppressive and destructive, and then watch that fall apart. And then we thought we could replace our religious structures with ideological ones, with political utopianism, that we thought, okay, we can do better than a spiritual heaven. We can make a heaven on earth with our material philosophies. And then fascism came into being, and all of the mechanizing and the huge leaps in technology and industry that we created in the beginning of the 20th century led to industrial levels of killing. And then we thought maybe we could make an egalitarian society with these new philosophies. And when we tried to try to enact it, we created a different kind of butcher house in the communist regimes. And it's like every time we came up with something, all that it seems to lead to is a nightmare. And now in the postmodern world, everyone's going, I don't know what the fuck to believe in. Because I don't want to be the Nazi at the gate. I don't want to be a slave owner. I don't want to be a communist gulag, like whoever warden, right? And they're just wondering, what the hell do you do in light of that? And in that mindset, what she says has been lost is values. And because values are aspirational, there's something that isn't something that you can get now, right? It's something you aspire to. It's even an ever receding. There's another guy, Kronman. Let me see if I can get this right. What's his name? Anthony T. Kronman in The Belief After Disbelief. There we go. There's another book. He called this eternal. He called it they're eternal things, which is that they can't actually be captured in this moment. You'll never have them. But what happens is in the pursuit of this impossible thing, you make the world more in its image, more good as a result of the pursuit, even if you can never have it perfectly. And it's something like justice is this, is that you'll never have perfect justice. You'll never have a perfect justice system. People aren't perfect, and they are the things that operate the whole system. So it's not going to happen. But the aspiration to a higher justice is what continues to progress us, to push us forward in history towards something better. But in this moment that we're in, we don't have these eternal things. We don't have these values. We're distrustful of all these values. And so we have nothing to aspire to. And so if we're asking why no one has come up with some positive version of the future, it's because we don't know what to value. We don't know what to value right now. We have no idea. We're very confused. So you're right. It would be a very interesting process for a genius level artist to sit down and actually think that through. Like, what can I do that would be better? And I think that you sort of have to set the goal from the outset. And I think that the value that matters most is love. And I think that love matters most. I thought about this hard as fuck. I don't know. Did I tell you this dream? I don't know if I told Jordan the dream that I brought up.
Jordan might not have been here when you were stuck on the dream.
Can I derail this for just a moment? I promise it goes.
Dude, that's what podcasts are all about, dude. It's all about derailing.
This happened months ago when I was still living in Michigan. And I was obsessed for like multiple weeks on end. I started reading incessantly about death, very seriously, and not just reading like reading a book, like on to the next page, but meditating on it and really trying to put myself in that place and imagine what that means, what it's actually like I am going to die. And chances are, just the three of us in this room, there will come a point where one of us has outlived the other two. That will happen, right? This is a guarantee, unless we're all in a plane and it crashes or something. Something crazy like that, right? That will happen. And that's the level of meditation I was doing. And I was just thinking and thinking and thinking, and I was probably horrible to be around. But I had a dream, and the dream was wild. And so I woke up, and I was in this like Italian home, and it had white walls, but like kind of these sort of traditional pieces of artwork and stuff on the walls. And there's a big family there. And then I was there with who was ostensibly my girlfriend, with this beautiful dark hair, beautiful Italian girl. And her family was in the living, or like the dining room. And there's a living room, right? And it splits down. And I can see the dining room, which connects to the kitchen, but there's a dividing wall here, right? So on this side, there's not quite a door, but like an arch, so you can go under it to get into what would be kind of more living room and regions in the kitchen and so on. And her grandmother, this matriarch, comes up, and she's talking with this girl, and they're talking to me, and their uncle had just died, or I guess my girlfriend and this uncle had died. And they were going to conduct a seance. So they were going to bring his ghost back to talk to him. And so I walk under this little arch into this area, and they have this set up with candles and everything. And I'm there with the girlfriend and then the matriarch, and they do whatever they do. And then suddenly the uncle comes barreling into the room. Like he's no time. He's like, come on. And he's this big old bulbous Italian guy with, those like button up shirts, like the silk shirts with the white stripes. It's like a black, it's an all black shirt with just the white thing. It was great. Like I'd been watching a lot of Sopranos, which is why I think that this happened.
I know it's really hyper specific.
Yeah, I've been watching the Sopranos. So he comes barreling through. Not like, oh, I'm so good to see you, whatever. He's like, I've got a place to be. And he hands me, like, he's tossing off. He's like, just take this. It's like, I don't need this anymore. Just take this. And it's like a frame almost, but pushed out of this, like, canvas, almost like an art piece, would be like the mold of a face. It looks like you'd put something on there to create, like, it's a structure for a mold.
You had a dream of a death mask. What the fuck?
Yeah. And the thing was, draped over this structure that makes the face is human skin, like an actual face. And I get the impression that it's his face on this mold, and it doesn't fit, which is so brilliant. It's so cool because he didn't feel like he fit in his own skin. Like that's the image. It's like, whoa. And he's like, I don't need this anymore. But the mask is a persona, right? So he doesn't need the persona that he never fit in anymore now that he's died. Okay. Which is so cool. Like this was a dream. And anyway, so he barrels forward and he's like, come on. And he gets in his car, and then me and the girl get in a separate car, and we're going to follow him. And I'm driving and she's next to me. And as we're driving, he's going up. He's driving to death. That's where he's going. Right? That's the sensation that I'm getting. He's driving to death. And as we're going over, you know how sometimes the highway exits will go way up to get over all the other roads underneath that are the highway underneath and all the other crisscrossing exits. This is like the highest exit that we're taking. And it goes up and over. You can see the sun setting on the other side into the sun. Like driving over the crest of this exit, right? He's taking his exit. And I can feel him shudder, like flinch. Like he gets scared of what's about to happen. And the moment he gets scared, like, have you ever seen the rain coming at you from across a lake or something, right? It's like one big sheet coming your way. It's like that, but instead of dropping down rain, instead of it raining this wall, it's raining down like black smoke. It just boom, like coming down and just cascading like a waterfall, but barreling down towards us. The moment that he got afraid. And I'm like, whoa, holy shit. We're about to die. I grab her, close my eyes, and then hold and kiss her. And then we wake up back in the house. So we're back to the original part of the dream. And the family's all there. And I, in the dream, start explaining to them the meaning of the experience that we just had. So a lot of the logic that I'm telling you now was happening in the dream. Like I was working through the representation in the dream.
Wait, were you lucid dreaming then in all of this?
I didn't feel like I was in control of it. It felt more like just like, oh, I got to think about what that meant. That was really interesting. And it was just like, might as well start now. and then, okay, so that conversation's happening and stuff. And the family's like going to go sit down and have dinner where you're about to go. And I grab her for a moment and I look at her. I'm like, hey, like, I'm just wondering, like when it was coming at us and we were going to die, did you close your eyes? And she goes, no. And that was the best part, which I still am like, whoa. Right. And I woke up right after that happened.
Yeah. Wow.
And I was like, what? Wow. But so I don't even know what to make of that ending. Right. But what I did notice was when it all comes down to the last moments, right? When the nuclear bombs are going off and you're waiting for the flash to hit you. are you reaching for money? Like, are you going to embrace your phone? Are you going to be like, wow, look at these nice things that I own. Look at the diploma I have on my wall. If you did that, you're embarrassing. It's like what the only thing that matters in the last moments is the people that you love. It's the only thing that matters. That if you had 5 seconds left on this earth, that's what you're going to do. But the thing is that you always only have 5 seconds left. You don't know when you step off a curb and you get hit by a bus when that's going to happen. You don't know when a gas leak occurs. You don't know when you're going to lose somebody. Like, it could happen at any moment. The fact that it isn't some overt explosion that is clearly coming your way doesn't mean the fact that it isn't that doesn't mean that it isn't coming your way. And so it seemed to me right then that, like, oh yeah, that's clearly the most valuable thing. And then I had to construct a philosophy after that part. But that's what spurred me to start thinking about love as being the value that we should be aspiring to.
Okay, so 2 things. Fucking love that dream. Holy shit.
Dude. What the fuck?
Write that down, especially that last part.
I was gonna say, Joe, I think you need to write this down. We need to release it as a blog or something, or maybe I'll just clip that whole explanation and put it in a clip.
Make it short and throw it out there.
Yeah, I'll put that as a separate clip.
I was gonna say a short film or something. The segue, short film, something, and that the last line of the movie is like, that was the best part. Oh, I was like, dude. That was
right, like I woke up too. It was like, and credits. I was like,
dude,
what?
What if we did? What if we did it as if you film it as if it's not a dream the whole time, but then when you say, and that was the best part, then you actually wake up, and then it ends the film.
I don't know, dude. It's wild.
I'm just saying,
I would be happy to make a screenplay or something, but I don't even feel like I could take credit for it because, like, I was asleep. You know what I mean? This is absurd.
That's insane.
Fucking wild.
It's really dope. But I love that you said love, because as we were talking, and I was like, I think it's love. I think that is the most important thing, and like truly caring for another. You know what I mean? Like on a I don't even know how to articulate what love is. I think that's an interesting conversation. If you want,
here's the philosophy that came after. This didn't happen until I moved and came here and had too much time walking to and from class and thinking. And I was like, oh, I get it. I was like, I think that what love is the connectedness of all things. It's the fact that this is all one thing, right? There's an illusion of separation, but that's all that it is. It's just an illusion that this is all one thing. And that's a fact, right? That is a fact of the universe. No one's going to contest that. That's thought about the physics or whatever. The separation it's fake. But what the feeling of love is, what these different kinds of love between friends, between lovers, between a father and his daughter, all these things are just a recognition of that fact and then an expression of it. So it's not that love is a feeling, right? This is the feeling is a representation of a fact. Love is a fact of reality, like fundamentally. Like that's a metaphysical claim, like as in the deepest possible claim you can make is that, and I don't see how it's deniable, that everything is one thing. And the feelings and expressions of love are just taking that into account. I think it's part of what makes it so powerful, right? It's not us. It's not like there's this song that's horrifying for its like the sentiment. It says like, I think it's something like art is fraud. It's like the most cynical take on everything. Like art is fraud and love is just a drug from God.
I've
Like,
heard I've heard that line.
Like, as if all that love can be reduced to oxytocin or serotonin. But those things were generated to, in some sense, make an experience that represents a fundamental fact of reality. So that's my take.
No, I think I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. And it just begs the question to me. The first thing I thought of was like, how do you extend that to a stranger? And I feel like that's somewhere in that question lies a positive take on all this future stuff we're talking about. Of how when you can have someone you'll never, like literally someone you'll never see, right? Never know they exist. Because there's people that will go our whole lives and we'll never meet them, never know about them. And how do you extend that fact and able to express that fact to that person? And I feel like that's how we get to this.
To put this in like sociological terms, it's like, how do you shrink the category of other, right?
I think you have to this is something that's going to be serious for the next like fucking 100 years, obviously, but like the next few decades, this is going to be a real question. But I think that what you do is you try to make your world, as much as whatever control you have over it, into the kind of world you would want for them, for other people, for even that stranger, right? And you don't really know them, so you, to some degree, you just have to try to make it to the best of your ability, as ignorant as you are, and then just try to build your world into something that's as beautiful as you can manage. And then if enough people do that and are inspired by that and continue to build and build and build, then you create states and nations that are a place that are a beautiful place to it, that attract people to it, right? That those people may have the opportunity to arrive at on their own, of their own accord, and that you've helped, out of love for the stranger, make a world that they can inhabit. And that is our responsibility. we can't, if you love other people, if you love people even you don't know, suffering and are going to be suffering, unfortunately, for a lot of reasons in the developing world for the next few decades. If you care about them, then you change your environment. You make it a little more caring. You make it a little more beautiful. You make it a little like as if you're trying to throw a surprise party for someone you've never met.
It's a great way to put it. It reminds me of a quote. So there was a book I read a while ago called The Dream Machine, and it's basically about all of the scientists and technologists that helped bring the computer age as we know it. They were the founding fathers of it, so they have no recollection of how it actually turned out as we know it now today. But one of the things that one of the guys, I can't remember who it was specifically, but one of the quotes that they said was, if you want to create the future, you have to live it. And I remember highlighting that quote and like really like feeling it like sink in. And it maybe is like I feel some sort of kinship to these people, like at an ideological level, being so close to technology, that I was like, oh fuck, there it is. Like, you don't go into these things like wanting to create a new technology and quote unquote being a visionary and saying like, well, I'm a visionary, I'm going to go create a thing. Like, that's not how that works. Like, you have to be before you do, not do before you be. Like, you have to believe it so much so that it just becomes a byproduct of how you lived. Like, and like the essence of who you are. Like, I think in some sense, Steve Jobs was the essence of the things he created, initially at least. Like, if it wasn't for him, I don't think you get the things he created, right? Like, you don't get the iPod or the Mac or the whatever, because somehow he was able to give people that little bit of push to get them to 11 so that they could do things that they didn't even think were possible. And you know, me and you, Jordan, have talked about this before, that people didn't really like him. But now when people look back on the experience they had, they look back almost like reverently and say, God, it sucked. But also, man, we did something fucking special.
Yeah, and it's interesting because this conversation is tying a lot of thoughts together. And one of them is that I was recently thinking about, does it matter when it's all said and done? Does it matter if you were liked, or does it matter what you brought or gave to the world, however you want to look at it? And I'm getting to the point that I'm like, I don't know, as long as you have good intentions, right? So not like you're an evil person, but like you have good,
Right.
you're well intentioned and you're doing things for others, right? You are living the future that you want to create, and everything you're doing is in purpose of that. Does it matter if you're going about it that way if you're liked? And I'm almost thinking it doesn't. I don't think it matters.
Hmm.
And the other part that this is attaching to is to what Joe, you were saying about how, doing things for others, it's almost like being selfless, right? Is like, or sorry, not being selfless, but being selfish is like the number one corrupt thing you can do as a person. Because anything that's evil in the world, usually if you take it down to its root, there's selfishness at the
Yeah,
base.
you're valuing yourself or your own grandiosity.
Yeah, and I would say it's a certain level of selfishness, not just self awareness or assertiveness, right? Right. There is or self protection. There's versions of this where you can't be walked over because being walked all over makes you resentful, and that resentfulness is dangerous to the people that you love. Right. So you have to be. I don't want to say the word selfish, but you have to be protective of yourself to some degree. But in the way that you're talking about selfish, it's the antithesis of love because it separates. That what it's doing is it's making the assumption that I can draw a line around myself and I am in my own little world against everything else, as if I am somehow separate from it. There's an old translation. I don't remember if it's Diablo or Diabolos, like the Greek, from which we get like you get devil in Spanish, that means to separate. The idea is like that, like these characters are the ones that cut things apart and that they move, and you get all these stories about the horrors for multiple reasons. It gets more complicated the older you get, but the old stories, like the great evils, will dismember you. They will cut you, like pull your limb from limb, and all this, right? But it's all an act of separation. It's to tear a person apart, to tear you from the world, from people. It's like it's the anti-love.
Damn.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've figured it out. So
Really?
really, I think so. To make a story that's like the antithesis, I guess, of like what a cyberpunk is, or these kind of dystopian, futuristic. What's the worst case scenario if this goes too far, capitalism or whatever, right? Or if we don't pay attention enough to the our ecosystem and shit like that. Like, what's the worst? And then it's like, okay, how do we look at these same ideas and show what would it look like if this was all good? Like,
right.
and there's not one story I can think of. If you guys know of one, I don't think so, right?
Yeah.
Like there's always bits and pieces of it, but then it's always like, and then it clicks and it falls into the dystopian world.
Right.
It's like, and it's good, and then divert.
Right.
It's really hard. I can't think, especially with science fiction, I can't think of anything that does it. And even the ones that try to do it, they don't do it well. So like they try to posit what the really good version of the world is. Like Elysium, I think was the name of it with right. But it always is it's in that it's like the top 1% gets to live on some special place, but it's on the backs of the people that are suffering and all that. So it's never actually a positing of what can we do for humanity to make us better.
It's still dystopian.
It's always a kind of it's using the science fiction medium to talk about modern political and equality dynamics and all this stuff. So it's not even really trying to do that. but and they don't even do it well often. It's like all they do is they make all the buildings white, and they put some plants around, and everything is very clean. And people talk with a British accent, and it's like, for fuck's sake, it's cheap.
I hate that you're so right, Joe.
You know what I mean? It's the same shit.
I think the only thing I could think of is like, I mean, it's not even purely good in that sense, but it's in fantasy, but it's the original Lord of the Rings trilogy is the closest thing, and Tolkien created it. It's called the eucatastrophe, which means good catastrophe. And he wanted to basically, part of the reason you have those moments where everything is as dark as it possibly could be, and it looks like everything's gonna fail. All of a sudden, it clicks. Right, the Battle at Helm's Deep when Gandalf shows up and the Riders of Rohirrim, storm the Uruk-hai as everyone's about to die. Like that whole idea of it, right? It's like, okay, maybe that's the kind of story we could write, right? Like we could try and what would be the I don't even, would it still be cyberpunk? Because I feel like cyberpunk has to be edgy. Are we creating a new genre by talking about this?
It'd be very hard. You can see the tech. It's really cool. You can see the tech.
I can see the tech
because you have this is one of the coolest things ever. They made this huge. So you know how what is it? Pesticides. It's very hard to get them everywhere, and you just have to spray them all over the place like crazy. But the pesticides end up hurting people down the line, and it's not good for the plant's long run, and there's a whole bunch of problems with it, right? But it's better than not having the pesticides, because then you lose a ton of crops and then people starve. So it's like, shit, okay. But what they did is AI tech was able to, they built this wild version of this that goes down the line, and the AI inside of this fertilized spreading machine can look at individual plants and gauge how much exact pesticide they need, or fertilizer, or 5 other different things. So it just goes online and it individually coats each plant based on their needs.
That's
right.
Really
So that's where this technology can go.
I just saw another one, Joe, where they were doing laser removal of weeds downfield. So there's this giant crawling robot that has cameras, and it can basically pinpoint the weeds that's popping up near plants, and it just says, nope, we don't want that weed, and it just zaps it real quick, and it just moves along.
Right. And if you didn't care about people getting drugged with pesticides, and you were being selfish, right? You think you, as a business, then are cordoned off against the reality that you're embedded in. Then you would just do it and throw it away and never, who gives a shit? Buy my fucking tomatoes. Fuck off. But what that machine does is it takes into account the fact that it's in a world with people and tries to be better for them, right? And there's selfish profit motives and all that. That's all going to still be there. But that's okay. It's not exactly selfish to be rewarded for your effort, right? And that's fine, right? But it's like you just look at that kind of mindset is very different with that kind of technology. Or the types of what they're doing with different animals on farms now is they don't have them in bins, cordoned off from each other, put into categories and left in the fields. They have one huge open field, and then they rotate all the animals around, because it's like the cows will eat the grass and then drop the dung. But then what comes after that is,
I think it's the pigs.
Yeah, the pigs will go and eat all kinds of nasty shit. But then they stir up the ground and everything, and then they'll bring in chickens, and the chickens will eat the bugs that were all attracted to all this. So, but it also ends up improving the soil and the grass quality over time, because it's not just one animal stomping and eating in the same place all the time. So they create an ecosystem out of their whole farm and keep everyone moving and free and open. So they're even cage free, right? It's taking into account, in some sense, the humanity of the animal, and the fact that also the animal is a part of its natural environment. It's not even disconnected from the grass, from the soil, from these things.
It's like you're optimizing the ecosystem in which these things are supposed to operate, and we're just applying the human ability to optimize like their natural cycles, if that makes sense.
Like
Instead of
imagine a city like this. Imagine what you could make a city to look like from that mindset. Take that as the starting point and then ask, how do I make a city that looks like this?
Do you know what's funny about this? On Midjourney, I've tried to do the positive take of technology as images. Like, what does vertical cities look like with green tech, recycled water, fountains? Just try to, instead of looking at like the dystopian side of this, like in my own way of trying to seed in like into the zeitgeist of like human consciousness. What if it doesn't go to shit?
Wow. I mean, that's really interesting. So people are already thinking about that. We're getting there.
We're working on it. It's really complicated, and I think, Joe, to your point too, is like talking about like the capitalist side of this, or like the being rewarded. I mean, I'm just using capitalism because people have to make money. Like to do these things, you have to make money. It requires capital. And I think what's really important, what people don't realize, is like a lot of times there's like this weird distinction where it feels like it's being pulled in opposite directions. Where if you want to do something meaningful, you don't make a lot of money. What I think we need to start doing is, instead of putting those at opposition with each other, we need to start funding people who are solving really important problems in an intelligent way that is like creates a feedback loop. So in some sense, incentivizing people, quote unquote, selfishly to solve hard problems. Because if you're the guy who figures out how to create a new form of, robotic field anti-pesticide thing, or a thing that doesn't use as much pesticide, then that should be something we should want, right? Or at least start doing that so that over time, the cost of that starts to sink, because as you scale, typically the production gets better and better, and you cut down costs because it's not niche anymore.
And like there's nothing, to your point about capitalism. These things aren't in opposition, right? Capitalism is not in opposition to a meaningful or good life. That's not the thing. In part because one of the best things you could do, we have done for the developing free markets into them. And it's just it's given them the middle class for the first time ever, right? The standard of living across the world over the last like 60 years has launched in the developing world because they've had availability to global markets, right? So that's a function of capitalism. It's exporting capitalism to other places is a good thing. That's not the issue. The issue is when people confuse its position in a hierarchy of values. That if you elevate capitalism or money making or profit over love, now you have a problem. Now you have a real problem. It's that it needs to be subdued. What I would love to see is capitalists who aren't trying to make money, but who are remembering that capitalism is one of the best ways that we have as a society to fix problems, because it opens it up to this massive competition to solve the things that people are demanding to be solved. And so that's why I like Elon Musk, even if people don't like him for whatever 4chan memes he puts out there, because the things that he's making money off of are doing that. Building a more efficient electric car so that people like the idea of electric car and they buy it. And now we're doing something good for the environment. Getting us to space so that we're more likely to survive if a catastrophic event happens on this planet, right? Things like this. It's like, we can do that.
Yeah.
This is a thing that we can do. Find a problem, go fucking solve it.
I mean, I think it's important to realize, like you can be annoyed at Elon for whatever his personality quirks and everything, right? But he is not his companies. Like, he might be the guy that's steering the ship, so to speak, but there's still how many engineers and people that work at those companies that work every day in the factories that feel fulfilled and meaningful about the jobs they're fulfilling at those companies, right? Because to me, like, being a founder of something, what you are is a signpost saying, here is what I believe. come work for me so we can build that thing. So we can build Tesla and reinvent the electric car or bring it to a market. And now every major auto manufacturer has an electric car coming out within the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Or you have SpaceX, which literally kicks NASA in the ass and says, oh, wait, you guys are making this more cost effective than ever before when we shit the bed for the last 20 years. Oops.
Right.
And it's on top of this, and just circling back a little bit, it's like the idea of someone wanting a reward, I guess, or expecting one is like, oh, that's bad. Like the idea that if someone does like a charitable thing, and it's like if they say they did that, then the only reason they did it is to say they did it so people like them more. So that's fucked up.
It's very cynical.
It's right. Because, right, if someone does something nice for you, don't you naturally say thank you and then want to reciprocate that in some way? And it's usually like maybe not always like one-upping, but you at least try to meet them. Like, I will make this up to you. Thank you.
Right.
I think that's human nature. I think that's fine. And I think it's selfless. It's almost selfish that if you did something really nice to me, say I was like, yo, I really need money or something like that. Yeah, I got you, bro. Here's whatever. And then I don't respond to you, but I take it. And in some way from you and be like, well, fuck that. He didn't even fucking acknowledge that I just helped him out. I just think that in that sense, these people creating these things, Elon, the guy who made that, pesticide controlled AI, whoever, or guy or girl, whoever created that, whatever. They should be rewarded for that.
Right.
Right.
Like,
Right.
I think it's pretty simple.
I mean, you get rewarded, like at the simplest level, you get rewarded for the scope and difficulty of the problem you solve, no matter where you are. And it's could be, something as tangible and physical as designing a car or a rocket, right? But the other side of that is like being in the creative elements is your job is to make sense of the chaos, whatever that looks like. And what that ends up being is the culture movers that allow people to then imagine the possible futures, or rather the futures we shouldn't go down, right? That's what dystopian is for, because it's like, ooh, there's the warning signs. Maybe we want to pump the brakes a little bit and think of another way, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, I think part of the, like, maybe this is a separate conversation, but the cynicism of the modern world is a danger, because the cynicism leads to apathy, I think, and apathy is worse than anything, because if you don't care at all and you're just like, well, whatever, we're going to hell in a handbasket, that's not good. It's very not good.
And the apathy will immediately make you selfish, because when nothing matters and you're just like, oh, I don't really care, this is stupid, you're not. Well, one, that is selfish, because there are things that matter and there are things that need to be done. And if you just want to rest on your laurels, then and just wait out the end of the world while eating fucking ice cream by the gallon, then fine. It's like, well, you're kind of being a dick because there are people that are relying on you, even if you don't see it. Or you're assuming that there aren't people that rely on you. But it's also like the moment that you get into this place where you have nothing to do and you don't want to do anything and everything kind of sucks, then anything you have to do or anything you have a responsibility to do becomes a burden. It becomes this, oh, I can't believe I have to get up and do this. And that makes you even more selfish. In this suffering, this feeling of suffering without having anything to show for it, right? Where everything you do becomes this burden that you have to do it. So it's just a form of suffering. And that just leads you to what? Just be angry all the time because all you are is miserable. You're just fucking, it's like this feedback loop of misery. It's like, ugh. It's like, get off your ass, go do something.
Clean your room.
Yeah.
Clean your room.
Move to Nashville.
Oh man. I love how Cyberpunk took us here, by the way. That was
I know, it's an interesting wasn't expected to get here, but I mean, part of it to me was like I always thought that the story was kind of aiming at love to some degree, just with the dynamic that David and Lucy had from the very beginning. And in some sense, it's a bittersweet story because
Hmm.
it's like he roundabout sacrifices himself, but she still accomplished. Like somebody ends up happy-ish to some degree, or ends up with the dream they always wanted. I mean, it's not exactly what they wanted, but it's
Yeah.
She got to the moon.
that's what I'm saying. Like
Yeah.
she accomplished her goal, but it
Like,
doesn't
there's a
feel the same
lot.
after having met David.
There's a lot there because David is a hero, right? He is a hero. He just doesn't. He's not a. He ends up being a failed hero, right? So there's these distinctions in like the old myths and stuff, which is it's not just. It's not like
He's
you're
a
not.
tragic hero, I guess, right?
Yeah, I mean, he does. He is a tragic hero, but which is similar to the idea of a failed hero. It's the same idea. It's just that the ending doesn't work out, and it's like oh man, it's like the light was shining off you for a moment, and then something went wrong. Right? What was it that went wrong? And there's all these old big myths about that. So nobody told stories about the people that didn't become heroes at all, but they would tell stories about the people who got somewhere and then something went wrong. But it's like, okay, so he's a hero. He's successful in some regard. But it leads him to this. And ultimately it's a tragedy because he dies. In fact, he in this crazy mania that he gets into, this obsession to it's like he never mourned the death of his mom. She haunted him forever. And then as he was losing his mind, his unconscious reveals itself. And he's like, I'm going to make it to the top. And everyone that loves him follows him there. And then he dies, and everyone dies with him because they came with. And it's like, where did he go wrong? Well, you can't stop your mom from dying. Sorry, that will eventually happen. But he didn't mourn her. He didn't figure out how to overcome it. He didn't try to fix the society or the circumstances that produced. In fact, he joined the cyberpunks, right? So there was a ne'er-do-well shooting on the highway. They got his mom killed. And then he joins the type of people who are doing the types of shooting, right? How many people? He does kill a woman. He shoots her, and she has a picture of her and her son, right? So he fails on multiple levels. He fails. And the fact that he gets Lucy to the moon, I think, is a consolation prize. And it's like, man, she saw it from the outset too. She tells him in like the first episode, she's like, you do not belong here. Do not come here. And then like when they fall in love, she's like, do not do this.
Well, that's why she like isolates herself from him for a while because she's trying to like figure out a way to get him out of that world.
Yeah.
Right. She loved him, cared for him, wanted what was best for him. And I feel like he didn't see what he was becoming until he killed that woman.
Yeah.
Or at least that's how I took it. I was like, oh, he's realizing he's already lost himself. He's already
like
too far.
to me it was like he had PTSD from the beginning when his mom was killed. And it was like never brought up the whole time. And I'm like, no, like I felt myself like feeling it. Like I want it to be resolved because I know where this goes, which means like he's going to tear himself apart because like the world is just moving at a pace that doesn't allow you to process your trauma. And if you don't do that, what's your option? You fall apart, you crash and burn.
And it looks like PTSD. It's like his mom dies. It's a trauma he doesn't deal with. He becomes hyper vigilant, constantly looking for where he isn't safe, and then compensating for it by becoming more powerful, buying more upgrades, doing more things. All the compensating feeling of vulnerability and the potential for death that he witnessed in a traumatic way when he lost his mom. And he didn't deal with it.
And I'm pretty sure when his mom died, the conversation they were having was about how she just wanted him to get to the top, right? And she was like, I
I
just
think
want
so.
Yeah,
you.
like go to school and stuff like that.
So
Yeah.
he fixated on that. He's like, he undercut the morning and replaced it with this ideal
Yeah, get
that
to the
he
top.
thought would fill that hole he had.
Yeah, it's almost like he didn't want to face it, so he grabbed onto something else, like that's like a proxy for real healing, and that was making it to the top. I'll do right by my mom, not by not by not becoming a cyberpunk, not by actually even making it to the top through the system or fixing the system or any of these things, but he just becomes more and more powerful and more and more powerful. It's like he just doesn't get there. It's very strange. It's sad. It's actually sad.
Yeah.
And it's extra sad because, and this is why I hate our modern culture's thought about movies and stuff as it's just entertainment, or that it's not real. There's this feeling that it's just not real. It doesn't have any real meaning to it. Nothing has any meaning. Blah 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 blah. And that's such a shame because you miss how important these things are. Like, this story is obviously a fictional story, but I've met people that go down that road. Like, it's fake on that level, on one level, and it's very true on another. And that imbues this whole thing with meaning. And it reflects the meaning back to you, right? It's a two-way experience where it's like, I can watch the show, having had the experiences that I've had, and then see excuse me, and then see these things happen in the show that in an artistic way, that even if the facts aren't true, it reflects back to me something that's real, that is real to me. And then to see that happen in the show, it gets you more emotionally invested to believe the show.
Even though this was an anime, it makes you feel something multiple times. And I think part of that has to do with how well the music was chosen for the different emotional high points. Like the songs with him and Lucy are like, I've regularly listened to them just because it's like weird in a sad type of way, but it's like there's something very human about those, like the imagery and the I don't even know maybe a sense of longing about it. It's like you wish, it's almost like they wish they could have ran away and forgotten about this life, but there was a gravitational well in the lives that they were, the path that life had chosen for both of them. And all that led to was more pain.
Yeah. And I mean, this is like what the difference between art and entertainment, right? This was art. Like, they created a piece of art that you can watch, and it represents things that are in the real world, even though it's a science fiction. When you start gearing into entertainment, I start thinking of Disney or Marvel, when like maybe there's themes here and there that is like, okay, this is the point, but it doesn't connect. It doesn't feel real.
Right.
There's not you can't really, like, as much as I love Iron Man, I don't have an emotional attachment to the character. Really, you can get it. You can understand. Okay, I see who that person probably would be in the real world, but it kind of ends there, right?
Yeah.
But in things like Cyberpunk and anything else that we can discuss, you, within the first episode or the first two episodes, whenever his mom dies, and then how he's kind of going about life after that, and that moment of desperation where he takes the implant, whatever that special one is.
Yeah.
It's like that speaks to something deeper than just, oh, that was fun to watch.
Yeah.
And that's why I love this over not even just anime, but other, shows or movies or whatever that miss that beat. And I think that's an important thing. And that's what this did really well. Because at the end of it, I was sad. I was like, oh, I feel like, yeah, I'm happy for Lucy. Like, she got what she wanted, but I'm like, but that was a sad story like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, damn, I wish that went differently,
right? And you're left wondering. I kept going back. I still go back to it. The show and like the music and stuff. I'll go back to it. It's like really good art. Really good art. It's like you're watching it and like there's something more there. I have to go back. Like there's something more there. I didn't finish it. Even if I watched every episode, I didn't finish the show. Like that's depth. That's what depth is.
Yeah, I love it. Which to say, there's nothing wrong with entertainment. I don't think. But just label it as such. Be like, you're just gonna have fun. Just
right.
That's fine. You know what I mean? All good.
It's like, to me, it almost speaks to like a replay value. Like in 10 years from now, people can go rewatch, or people can pick up Cyberpunk Edgerunners for the first time, and they're still going to feel something about it that's not going to feel dated in the sense of where our society has moved.
Yeah.
Or maybe seem dated in some ways just because maybe our technology has changed, but the core essence of the story is still going to hit you as a human story.
To highlight that, that's dope that you said that. To highlight that, go back and listen to pop music from the 1910s.
Oh, interesting.
Fucking terrible. It's not, it is not good. Like, I do not care. Why were they listening to this? But it spoke to it's meant to live and exist in that time. It's not meant for fucking.
Yeah, pop has a very long, like, short shelf life, right? Like it's here and then it's gone.
Right. But then you can go back and listen Beethoven or Mozart. Mm-hmm. Granted, there's no lyrics, but it's like what it did, the mastery of it.
It still makes you feel something, even if you don't understand like how those instruments are played out or what's even being played at what octave or what, I don't even know anything about symphonies. Right. But you know what I mean? Like they're complicated as hell.
Right. Or like Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Still being adapted, and the stories still, they're still powerful stories, but there's, entertaining movies that have come out in the last 2 years that we will never watch again.
Yeah. Yeah. And then there's some that I'll go back to multiple times, like Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I knew we were going to get there. I was going to say it and I didn't.
Of course I'm going to go back to that. I thought that was the best movie I've seen in a decade.
I just finished reading the book that the two directors and writers wrote about it from A24 Studio. It's called a vast gyration of gas and matter in which you happen to occur. It's a quote from an Alan Watts speech. Yeah, it's fucking over the top and ridiculous, but I love it for everything that it's worth. But basically the entire book, and this would probably be a separate podcast, but the entire book is just an exploration of what about the multiverse, and take an interesting take on it that is juxtaposed to that of the Marvel take.
It's really cool because they come to a similar conclusion in that movie that I came to from the dream and everything. Right? It's that whenever it's like, yeah, there's a giant multiverse and everything is crazy and we don't even know what's going on and this is nuts and all that. And what does anything mean if everything's happening all at once and all this? It's like that simple line that I forget the character, the husband in that says,
Raymond.
Raymond. And he says, in another life, I would have loved just doing laundry and taxes with you. Right. Just to say, right. Because it's not about all the material, just to be with another person is where
my heart, every time I see that setup, I'm just like,
because it showed what would happen if they didn't love each other. Right. And went their separate ways and they're going through that. And he still says, oh, I would much rather have done that.
Yeah.
In spite of everything, right? Yeah. Like, it's wild.
I love that line so much. When I heard that, I was like, this movie is a masterpiece. I was like,
it just
still doesn't get talked about.
I was like, oh. Yeah. I teared up. I teared up so like crazy.
Yeah. Multiple times in that show.
Oh yeah.
People have said that this sequence with the rocks, there were some people who were like I've never been so emotionally invested in two speechless sequences with rocks and just text on screen. Like, if you would have asked me in a million years if that would ever work, I would say no fucking way.
Good movie. I think I need to rewatch that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely probably one of the top movies of the year for me.
Easily.
Well, guys, we're already over an hour. Hour and 40, actually. Holy crap, where did the time go? I thought we were just over an hour. Holy crap.
That's how you know it's good.
Talk about.
Well, Jordan, it was great having you on finally.
Absolutely great to be on. We will do this again.
Definitely.
Yeah.
These are a lot of fun to do, and just doing these consistently, it's like, I don't know, there's a lot in the entertainment world right now that is interesting again. We kind of went through a down period with COVID and things like that. You know, they just weren't releasing things, but it feels like we're going through a resurgence right now, which is a lot of fun because there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah, the good stuff is just a little hidden. It's not far out of reach. It's just a little hidden.
Yeah, you just gotta keep your ear to the ground, and oh, there it is.
Oh.
Dope. Well, for those of you who watched, I don't even know. I haven't been paying attention, so sorry if I missed anything. But I'll get this on the podcast platform shortly. And see everyone next week.